Hi, everybody. Welcome to Effective Artistry. This is not therapy hour. Sorry.
Hello, yes, welcome to the This Is Not Therapy Hour. I'm Brandon Testers, and I am a licensed therapist, but this is not therapy. Excuse me. With me today is Cecil, as always. We don't have Sarah with us again today. Welcome. The This Is Not Therapy Hour is an opportunity for us all to just have a conversation and chat with whoever's here in chat. And every week we pick a theme. The theme this week is planning. Which is a big one and can go a lot of different directions, but we have fun with that because we get to go all over the place, and we like that. So we pick a theme every week just to make it easier to get questions ahead of time and for people to know what they're signing up for. But if you're here, we'll go wherever chat goes. Any questions, comments that anybody here has, whether it's about planning or anything else.
Or about haircuts, no.
Yeah, we like talking to people. So thank you for the compliment for Cecil Pitched Watch. Yeah, making plans to make your plans work for you. Planning is interesting. Did I cover all the stuff, Cecil, that I'm supposed to cover?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, planning is an interesting one because it's something that people tend to misunderstand kind of like fundamentally, just because people don't talk much about what plans really are and what they're really for. We talk about plans. All right, let's start here. We can divide plans up into like two broad categories because we're going to deal with them differently depending on what it is. That's my tea timer, talking about plans. So there's planning that involves more than one person. And that kind of planning is a form of communication, right? That people together make plans. And, the idea then is that we can rely on each other to do whichever part of the plan each person was assigned to do, et cetera. And then there's planning, which usually is what people want to talk about when we're talking about executive functioning. That's for the self, right? That I make a plan that tonight I'm going to work on my screenplay, or this weekend I'm going to hang out with a bunch of friends and ignore work or whatever, right? So those two things need to be handled differently. One, again, is a form of communication. The other is about setting intentions. Does that make sense, Cecil? Or when you say yeah like that, it makes me think the answer really is no, it doesn't make sense. What is it?
Like plans, like, to me, plans are like this, very stressful, monstrous beast. So to hear you put it so simply, it's like a little I guess that's not inaccurate, but you forget the whole, you didn't include the crippling anxiety or the overwhelming stress. Or
we will get to those for sure. Because this is the fundamental problem, is that those two types of planning get conflated into one. So in other words, that when we make a plan for ourselves, I plan that I'm going to work out tomorrow morning, right? That we treat it as though it's the kind of planning where we're planning with other people, where if I don't follow through, it causes a problem because somebody else is relying on me theoretically to get it done, right?
Okay.
So let's start by talking about that planning for the self, because that is usually where we get more questions in our work. So we use the term or phrase a lot of setting an intention. All that means is that you are utilizing your consciousness, your awareness, to deliberately and consciously choose something that isn't happening in the moment but will happen in the future. And if we really wanted to get into the nitty-gritty, anything that is consciously decided is always a plan. It's never right in the moment. It's always at least a little bit in the future, but we don't need to go down that road right now. Okay. So setting an intention, the vast majority of what we do is done autonomically, is done without any conscious awareness or input. When people talk about the subconscious, doing things subconsciously, again, I'm already ranging off the main topic, but we do things subconsciously all the time, meaning beneath conscious notice, right? Subconscious. But people tend to think of the subconscious as like a part of the brain, like a space in the brain that's the subconscious and it does all kinds of things. When really it just means that most of what we do, we are not deliberately choosing to do. We're just responding. Now, in the moment, we can't actually deliberately choose anything because we have to take a step back and, like create space to think about it. That doesn't mean that we have no control over what we do. We can modify how we go about doing things. And that's what the conscious part is for, to step back away from the moment, especially outside of the moment, and think about what's coming next or what happened last or, et cetera. What might happen if I blank and if they yada yada. So when we say set an intention, all we mean is that you've arrived at some conclusion consciously and decided on that course of action, on that whatever. I am going to do this. I'm going to make this happen. Sometimes it's very specific and practical and easy to observe, like I'm going to go to the store at 9 p.m. Sometimes it's much bigger and more vague, and it's like, I want to be better about communicating my needs to other people. Either way, you're setting an intention. So that's why I like to use that phrase to separate it out from planning, which is what I use planning to mean more often than not, is to let's make plans together, communicate. Does that make sense?
So for the way you're describing this and everything else, it sounds a lot like this making a plan for yourself is very similar to like goals. So much so that like, is it even indistinguishable from goals, or is that just like an arbitrary line that we've drawn to say like, oh, goals are things that I like write down and like want to do, and plans are things I just come up with on the fly?
It is arbitrary. Any goal you give me, I could argue that it's a plan, and any plan you give me, I could argue that it's a goal. And again, it's not about accuracy, it's about utility. So there is no correct or incorrect way to say, for example, okay, I am going to work out every morning. Is that a plan or is that a goal? I could say that the plan and my real goal is to get in better shape. I could say that it's a goal, establishing that routine, whatever. All that matters is which way of looking at it makes it most useful. But yeah, it's arbitrary because it's not real. Any intentions about the future aren't really happening. They're just thoughts about what I want to happen, and to call it a goal versus a plan, we treat them differently. So there's utility in calling it one or the other.
Okay.
But
for our intents and purposes for this one, then, do you think we should focus then on making define plans as things that you make with other people, basically goals that you make with other people, or?
Oh, my microphone is making a noise. Maybe if I move my cup over here. So we can address both of those things, but I want to address the plans by yourself first. Actually, let me make sure that it's using the correct mic. That might be too. Just because that is usually what we get questions about. Okay, that's right. And usually when people are talking about plans, what they mean is I have set an intention at a specific time or in a specific way, or, they're talking about, it's not just why is the distinction so important? The distinction between plans and goals isn't super important generally. In a specific case, it might be important, but only because we interact with things differently. And I would argue in most cases, it's better to think of what we're talking about right now as goals than plans, because of exactly what I'm about to say, which is plans are tools, not bosses, not taskmasters. You cannot fail at a plan. A plan is a map you're making of a place you've never been before, right? Or how to get to a place you've never been before. You have information, you've talked to other people, you've been nearby, but you can't know it exactly. So when you make a plan, what you're doing is making your best guess of what will be the way to go about doing whatever it is you're attempting to do that will work for you. When the time comes, when the moment arrives, if you don't do that plan, most people will then go into, oh crap, I failed, what's wrong with me? If they pay attention to it at all. Sometimes we can blow it off, but if we think about it at all, it's usually a deficiency of, I had this plan, the plan would have worked, but I failed it. I messed it up. But remember that it's your best guess. When you make a plan, you're taking all the information you have to make your best guess about how to move forward. When the time arrives and you don't do it, whether it's because something else came up, or because you just don't feel like it, you don't have the energy, whatever, obviously your guess was wrong. And we can respond to that in different ways. If we respond to it by saying, the plan was perfect and I am a failure for not following it, that's usually not very useful. Usually that just makes us miserable and still doesn't get us to do whatever it is that we were trying to get ourselves to do. Or if it does, it's after a good amount of time of being miserable anyway. So it doesn't happen then. I think that generally the more useful way to look at it is to say the past version of me knew less than the current version of me. By definition, as time passes, you know more, even if all you know is how I feel in this moment versus how I thought I would feel in this moment. Maybe I didn't even think about how I'd feel at all. The current version of me knows more than the past version of me that made the plan. So if I'm not following the plan, it's because I know more that I didn't know when I made it. And so I adjust it. It's a tool. It doesn't mean I have to go this way.
So the theory that this, like, it sounds like it's good to go, but in reality that means, like, so I'm making plans to, we won't talk about work stuff. Let's talk about like, because now that things are starting to open up, let's say we make plans to go see a friend. And we're going to meet them at this one place. Well, we make our guess about that, based on whatever. And then as we're going along, we realize, like, oh, cool, we have more information now. So we realize this plan was maybe not, has to change, either because it wasn't fully aware of all this stuff and have to adapt and everything else. But then all of a sudden it's like, how do you deal with it then? Like, how do you keep going with it? Because you're like, okay, well, now we have to change location. We have to change what? Like, does that make sense? Maybe too vague, sorry.
I mean, it's general. So the real answer is it depends on what the plan is, the specifics of what you need to do to change it. But also you're talking about plans that involve other people, which then, yes, does involve more work to change because you've got to communicate with the other person. Presumably when you make plans with other people, there's some communication that goes into making that plan originally. And so if someone deviates from the plan in a way that causes problems, because not all deviations from the plan do, but in a way that does, then yeah, usually that means you've got to go communicate with that other person again, for whatever reason. And yes, sometimes people get real upset about that. Sometimes people are more accommodating, but that's where the failure part comes from, is if I make plans with a person and I bail, then yes, by definition, I am inconveniencing that person. To whatever level they care about that inconvenience, I mean, it might be a lot, it might be nothing, but there was a plan, there was something set that's now not going to happen. And if it's going to happen, now we both have to put work. I'm now asking the other person to put more effort into communicating again in order to adjust the plan. That's why I'm trying to separate them into two different things.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. And when you're saying it this way, it sounds like the idea of making plans is really just another way of it. Isn't really an accurate way of plans seem no longer accurate. Wow, I'm just not articulate. Because it seems a lot like essentially the same theory and idea of goals. And then when you're talking about making plans with other people, it's about that communication aspect then again, which, previous streams about. So it seems like these two now are being forced into one category, and we just call that plans.
Right. It's a language issue more than anything, really. If I make a plan with you to meet up at the restaurant at 7 p.m. and then change, it does materially affect you, right? So I either, and a lot of times we'll do this exercise with clients where what we do is look at every possible option and not assess. It's kind of like brainstorming. Let's look at everything that could happen. This is especially useful when people are only seeing options that they don't like, because there are cases in which every possible option is one you don't like, and you have to choose which one you dislike the least, right?
Yeah.
So in this case, you and I made a plan to show up at meet at the restaurant at 7. I have decided for whatever reason that I'm not going to go. So either I force myself to go, even though I don't want to, and obviously there's upsides and downsides to that, or I don't go and I don't communicate with you about it. So you go and expect me and I don't show up, in which case afterwards we either will communicate about it later or not. And again, upsides and downsides to each of those things. Or I tell you that I'm not going to go, and we decide that that's okay and we don't need to reschedule, it's just not going to happen. Or we have to put effort in communicating and rescheduling it for another time or modifying the plan in some way. Those are it. I mean, either I go or I don't go. And then depending on which one I do, I either communicate with you about it or I don't. Right?
Okay.
So yeah, that's why I think people get into such a place. Because of course, when we talk about plans, most of the time we're talking about plans with other people. Because when it's just ourselves in our head, that's an artificial thing that doesn't happen by necessity. We learn how much effort do we all put into developing my own way of making plans, right? So usually when we're talking about plans, it's because you and I had plans and I messed it up, right? But that doesn't translate over to when I'm doing it for myself. Because when I change my plan for myself, I'm the only one who has to do anything about that. And here's how I always talk to clients about that. You set an intention. I'm going to start trying to shift into that language like I do in sessions. Is setting an intention is just myself. Making a plan is working with other people, right?
Okay.
I set an intention to work on my essay tonight at 7 p.m. The time arrives and I really am not feeling it. I'm exhausted or I'm just into something else. For whatever reason, I don't want to do it, right? Now, here are my options. I either do the thing, force myself to do it, whatever, right? When the time arrives, well, ignore the like whether I feel like it or not right now. When I set an intention and the time arrives, I either do the thing or I don't do the thing, right? If I don't do the thing, here's what I always encourage clients to do. If you're not going to do the thing at that time, that is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Reschedule it. Remake your plan. You made that plan, you set that intention for a reason in the first place. So just do it again. Say, okay, I know more. It turns out this time isn't a good time for it. I'm going to move it to another time. Or give up on the thing and say, yeah, never mind. I thought it would be a good thing to do. Turns out I don't feel like it, so I'm not gonna, and that's fine. Or do neither of those things and also don't do it, in which case, yeah, you're gonna feel anxious. There's no other option. If I set an intention to do a thing, then don't do it, don't reschedule it, and don't give myself permission to just be okay with not doing it. The only other option is to feel like I have failed, like I've done something wrong. And the more I do that, the more I start to dread planning altogether because it feels like an obligation. If I set an intention, oh, I'm going to do this thing at this time, well, now I have to, because if I don't, I'm going to be miserable. And I can never, ever predict 100% that I will definitely follow through on an intention, even if it's 99.99, like we can't predict the future accurately. So every time I set an intention, don't follow the intention and feel bad about it, it makes me not want to set intentions that much more the next time. And so I'm only going to do them if they're really, really important. And because of that, that reinforces. Well, now it's an important one. And if I fail it again, it just gets worse and worse.
But then that's just modifying the value opposed to the cost.
Right.
Correct. Okay. So this is talking about specifically, making these plans with yourself of like, doing whatever with it. So let's take it the next step. So you set this intention to do this thing, to write this essay at 7 p.m. because now, at 8 p.m. you need to give it to your editor, I don't know, or a friend to read or whatever, teacher to turn it in, whatever that is. So then 7 p.m. hits, you have this intention, you planned it poorly. What do you do then?
Like, assume that you mean that when the time arrives, for whatever reason, it's no longer a good time for me to do it. Either I don't feel it or whatever. Well, then here we go again. Back to the same thing of the other side, the plans with other people. Either I do it, force myself to do it, which just as a by the way, forcing yourself to do a thing by definition means that thing will go more poorly than it would otherwise. Any version of having to force yourself to do something means it will not go as well as if you just did it because you felt like doing it. Now, that's not practical. We have to do things all the time that we don't feel like doing, but just understand that the more what we mean when we say, I got to force myself, what we mean is my mind, my resources are spent on other things right now, but I've got to do this one anyway. even though it's going to be so much less efficient because I'm aware of or thinking about other things, right?
Okay.
Oh, you either force yourself to do it, you communicate with the person and reschedule or get support or some version of modifying the plan in advance, or you don't, and then you either communicate after the fact when 8 p.m. rolls around and they're like, hey, where's this thing? Or again, you don't. And I'll tell you, when you have a relationship with a person, this is kind of a new theory of mine, so I would be happy to hear people's thoughts, because everyone communicates differently, right?
Yeah.
That's obviously true. I like to talk. I talk fast. I talk in the moment. I don't need a lot of time to think about what I'm going to say next. That's not true for everybody, right? So everyone communicates differently. This is my new theory. For most of my life, I assumed that not communicating was just a different way of navigating relationships that's equally as valid, right? That I like to communicate, other people don't like to communicate, and both are okay, right? Lately, for the last, I would say several months at least, what I've been experiencing and seeing in friends and clients, I really would like to hear from people about this. What I've started to, I'm going to say realize, even though I'm not certain that this is correct, what I've started to realize is that no, not communicating is not a workable way to navigate a relationship. There are different ways of communicating, and even silence itself can be a means of communicating, right? Being passive aggressive is a mode of communication, or weaponized silence is still communicating a message to you, right? But not communicating at all, the relationship that person takes up less and less space in your awareness, and you take up less and less in theirs. Each person gets less and less prioritized. And that doesn't mean that there aren't people. I mean, I have friends that I will go 5 or 6 years without talking to and then call them up and we can chat. And that's fine. I'm not saying that the relationship is ruined, but certainly a relationship with somebody that I don't communicate with at all over 5 or 6 years is not something I'm thinking about day to day. If it was, I would be miserable. If every day I was thinking about this person and never communicating with them for 5 years, that would be miserable. Because you would, by definition, be forcing yourself not to communicate with the person because you think you can't. Anyway, I know that's a little off.
Yeah.
We're talking about renegotiating plans with people. Yeah, you got to communicate. And Cecil, I know you were kind of joking earlier, but also serious about plans being anxiety-inducing and stressful, and they are. But I'll tell you, any plan that is anxiety-inducing and stressful is a flawed plan. The act of planning itself, the act of setting an intention in and of itself is not a stressful, well, maybe stressful, but not an anxiety-inducing activity.
Okay.
Part of it that brings you anxiety is your uncertainty about whether or not that plan will go well and what are the consequences if it doesn't. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So, like, what do you do about that? Because, like, I mean, you know me, I hate making plans because it's just the idea of it. I mean, there's a question, like, we have a question about this. That kind of like, I thought it's like, well, it seemed like I wrote this, but let's see. Yeah, the idea of making plans is overwhelming. It feels it feels like so much compromising and making everyone happy that it results in me being stressed before, during, and after.
I mean, so yes, this type of planning is planning with other people. Yes, it's compromising. That's the whole point. In fact, even I'm guessing, I don't know this for sure, but even looking at the word compromising probably comes from the root of we each are promising each other something. If I was going to get everything I wanted and you were going to get everything you wanted, then why are we communicating about it in the first place? Like, yes, making a plan together is about, hey, I want a thing, you want a thing, let's find a way that this works for both of us. And that we can make that sound bad, but it doesn't have to be, because maybe you and I both want to get together and hang out. Let's find a plan where that works. We both get what we want. You initially throw out Tuesday. Oh, I'm busy Tuesday. What about Wednesday? Whatever. Because again, if I could just show up at your house and hang out with you anytime I want to, and you'll be there every time, then why do I need to communicate with you ahead of time and make a plan?
Okay.
So yes, it is compromising. Now, if compromising in that way, because what is not exactly stated here, but implied, it feels like so much compromising and making everyone happy that it results in me being stressed before, during, and after. Well, guess who in this equation is not being made happy? It says making everyone happy, except I'm stressed before, during, and after. So I'm not happy. So that's not an issue of making a plan at all. That's an issue of this person, for whatever reason, their happiness is getting less priority than other people involved in making a plan. And the specifics can range all over the place. Some people are, less likely to put out what they want, or hoping that other people will just give them what they want without communicating it to them, or whatever. Some people are assholes and don't care. Even if you do communicate to me what you want, I don't care. I just need to get what I need, right? So what exactly is happening is hard to say. But yeah, if making everyone happy results in you being stressed, what you're really saying is making everyone else happy stresses me out. And yeah, I mean, Kitchquatch says there, if it makes you miserable, don't do it. And there's validity to that. Again, obviously, we all have to do things sometimes where we'd rather not, or it makes us miserable, but it's worth it in order to whatever. And again, even that makes it sound like there's more choice than there really is a lot of the time. It's worth going to a job that makes me miserable so I can pay my bills. Doesn't mean it's like an optional thing that I can stop or replace, right? So yes, as a rule, I would say if it makes you miserable, not if it makes you miserable, don't do it. But if it makes you miserable, you better be really clear about why you're doing it. Because sometimes you do things that make you miserable. You better be clear about why. Because if you're not, then it just feels like you're doing something that makes you miserable because that's not in life. So yes, making plans is overwhelming, but this kind of plans, that comes back to communication. Again, it's not the plan, it's not the process of planning in itself. It's the communicating part. Right, see, so if I said to you, okay, let's go on a fun trip together, right? So now we have started the process of making plans, and you immediately reacted.
Sorry.
No, put it out there. Say it in words.
I'm just the idea of fun trip. I'm like, oh man, like that's just setting up for disappointment.
But in this hypothetical situation, there's real things that get in the way here. But in this hypothetical, let's say hypothetically, I'd say let's make fun plans together. I will take care of everything, and then just tell you what we're going to do, and it will all be things that you like and want to do the whole way, including other obligations that would otherwise stress you out, are taken care of in ways that make it so you don't have to think about it, et cetera, et cetera. Again, hypothetical, probably not really possible for someone else to make a plan like this. But if I were able to do that, that plan's not stressful. You're like, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Now flip it and say, okay, well, you got to make a plan for me that gives me everything I want and avoids any stress and takes care of all things. And I'm not even going to tell you what they are. You just got to figure it out. And if you guess wrong, then I'm going to be sad. Well, now it becomes real stressful. So again, it's not the planning, it's the communicating, how you're making the plan. For this kind of, what we're calling plans, communicating with other people. Intentions are different. Does that make sense?
Yeah, also, like, it's weird, but thinking about that kind of terms also made me realize like how important it is to also realize like what, you talk about like, oh, what's the point of the plan? Is kind of understand like what you want out of it. Because it's like, oh, if I had to make a plan, like it's easier for me to make a plan for something else that's not involving myself. If if I had that clarity, be like, oh, cool, we need to get to this point. Let's make a plan to get there. Opposed to just being like if I was like to plan, like if you asked me like, oh, plan something, a fun vacation, I'm like, for myself, I'm like, oh, I don't know where to start. But if you were to say like, oh, we need to like plan, this event for this reason, I'm like, oh, cool. Like, I mean, I know what to do, but I got a clear vision of where we need to go, so I can just figure it out as we go. So it kind of goes back to the idea of like knowing what you want, or essentially like what the goal of it is, and be able to like build towards it. Yeah,
the more clarity that you have, the better it will go. So this person who's saying this probably doesn't have much clarity about what they want, except for make everyone happy. They want everyone else to be happy. And that is impossible if you're making a plan with more than two people, right? Because if it's just the two of us, I can sacrifice everything to give you your perfect plan. But if there's three of us, I could sacrifice everything, but you guys won't necessarily be willing or able to do that, right? And so now I'm playing mediator, trying to come up with a plan that makes you both perfectly happy, which is an impossible task. Even if it's just slight difference of variations, someone will be getting less than exactly what they want, which plays into power, by the way, but that's a different conversation. And so I've now taken on, my only goal was to make everyone happy, which I now can't do. So I only had one intention here, was to make everyone happy, and now I'm failing at that. And then it's like, well, God damn it, like my only goal was to make you happy, and even that's not working. Like, you guys suck. Leave me alone. I don't want to do this. Like, I'm not even asking for anything. I'm willing to sacrifice everything to make everyone happy, and even that's not happening. You jerks, if you would just,
Yeah.
So, yeah, got to be clear on what you want. And then there's another part that you touched on there too, Cecil, real quick, which is planning is thinking, doing or acting or whatever, or in our terms, we've talked about this a million times, intelligence versus, dealing with non-real data, stuff that is not present in the physical environment, versus interacting with the physical environment, data that comes through the senses, through physical stimuli versus us creating it in our mind, right?
Okay.
So a plan is useless if you never do anything. That doesn't mean follow the plan. If I set a plan to do my homework at 7 p.m. and 7 p.m. rolls around and I don't do it, I still engaged with the plan. 7 p.m. arrived, I did something. Whether I did what I planned or not, either way, I've now got data from what actually happened instead of just theoretically what will happen in the future. Intelligence and the autonomic system are linked through executive function, right? That's the whole point of everything we're talking about, is finding the right balance between how much I think and how much I do. So right before this started, I literally just finished hanging this art, right? I was like sweating as this started from like trying to rush and get it done. Now, I've had days of looking at different pieces of art and comparing it all and saying, what should I put where and what about this? I know for myself, I don't have a lot of success visualizing in my head, but I try, and sooner or later, I have to put a cutoff point where I say, this is the best thing I've come up with. The next step is to put it up there, and then I can see, instead of imagine, I can see what it looks like, and then I can modify it. So one thing that happens with neurodivergent people a lot is that we want to plan and plan and plan until we have a perfect plan that we know will work, and we won't have to make adjustments. We won't have to quit midstream and start over or shift gears. But what that is going to do, the vast majority of the time, means that you just don't do anything, because you cannot predict the future. You can get more and more and more confident in your plan. It will never be perfect. So if you wait forever and make no plans, that causes problems. Of course, if we just do anything we feel like doing in the moment and respond to the environment without making intentions at all, that's a problem too. Typically, neurodivergent people don't have that issue quite as much. Obviously, there's impulsivity sometimes. But even that is, well, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole of what impulsivity really is.
Okay. So we make a plan, or we set an intention. We get to the point where it's starting to like enact. We either do it or we don't do it. Let's say, I guess this is what I care more about, is like we make dinner plans, and essentially they fall apart. Just we get there and everything's just like a mess and stuff, whatever. So now so that's like event has happened. How do I move forward from that? Because I know a lot of times we talk about like, oh, this thing happens, you think about it, you look at like what worked, what didn't, and then start building back there, like what would you do in this situation?
That's what you do. And that's not even an optional thing. That's what we do. You will observe and you will think about what went right and what went wrong. You will adjust your plan for the next time. That's the only option that there is. Now, obviously, the specifics of how that works out varies a lot. Sometimes one bad thing happens, you figure it out, and next time and from then on it's great. And sometimes you try and you try and you try, and it just keeps not working forever, right? But yeah, you iterate, you observe, you analyze, you make a new plan, and you act on that new plan. And then again, observe, analyze, plan, act. Observe, analyze, plan, act. Over and over and over. That's just what humans do. That's not a opt-in scenario. But go ahead.
So how do you then like break that cycle of like it building into a more and more stressful event each time you do it? And like, oh, I made this mistake here, and like, okay, and the next time you try to make it, but also there's like, oh, that issue was corrected or whatever. But there's also like now there's this thing present, or there's this, each time there's still stuff. It's like that adds to your stress on it. Like, what do you do then to like break that? Or is that like just...
Well, again, it's hard to say without a specific example, but generally, if we're talking about plans with other people, it's going to be about communicating. Because generally what you're saying is, I'm taking on more and more and more of the work of every time trying to act as though I understand everybody else and predict how they'll behave so that I make a plan that accommodates for that. And it's just, you can get really good at knowing people and predicting them. Prediction is not real and is never 100%. But again, that's just you taking on all the work, right? Now, maybe they're feeling the same too, but you're not communicating about it with everybody. Because, all right, this is going to get real philosophical. Not that I like that analogy. Well, all right, hold on. Let me do one like practical thing before we get really into this philosophy stuff.
Okay.
Talking about that balance between thinking and acting, right? There's a reason that like every buddy cop film, there's one that like thinks too much and doesn't act enough, and one that acts too much and doesn't think enough. And sorry, there's a fruit fly on my desk. I hope that didn't make a terrible noise on the microphone. And the resolution is that they both come to meet in the middle a little bit. The acting person thinks more and the thinking person acts more. There's a reason that speaks to us, that duality there. But here's my framework that I give clients all the time is I call it the idea to be, which is a phrase that I got from The Office. Maybe it was common before that, but it's from that episode of The Office where Michael Scott trying to come up with ideas to make the United States the greatest country in the world again. And somebody throws out antacid that you take once a week. And he says, okay, once a week antacid, that's the idea to beat. I love that framework, the idea to beat. Because otherwise we're going to sit around forever being like, okay, well, that's not going to work. I'm going to focus on the flaws of that thing and pick it apart. So my attention and my awareness is going to why your once a week antacid idea is a dumb idea, which it is. But that's not useful. That doesn't give us anything to do. If instead what I'm focused on is, okay, that's a crap idea, I got to come up with something better, then I'm working on something new and better as opposed to just criticizing what exists, because that doesn't get me what I want. So here's the rule. You come up with your idea to beat, and if your idea to beat is do nothing or sit here thinking or whatever, that's what it is. It doesn't matter how crappy the idea to beat is, you always have one, right? If it's just your default reaction, that's the idea to beat. Now, here's the question. Before I move, if I want to take more time to think and plan instead of putting this idea to beat into action, you have to be able to answer one of two questions. Is there specific information that you need or that you believe exists that will help you to make a better plan, but that you don't currently have? Or is there something that you can do that you believe will give you new information involving this plan, even if you don't know specifically what that information is? If the answer to either of those questions is yes, then you can wait, go do whatever you need to do to get the information, and then come back. But if the answer is no, if I don't know of any specific information to look for or of any specific thing to do that will give me new information, then it's time to go, because the only other way to get information is to enact the plan. Even if you are predicting that it will fail, and even if you're right, you still got to do it because you'll learn more in the process of doing it. You need more info. Those are the three ways to get it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if I say I want to make $1 million a day, which is, a terrible goal, but if it was my goal, I'd be like, okay, what's my idea to beat? Is my first
an acid you take? No.
is go learn to become a day trader on the stock market. Like that's the first thing that comes to my mind on how to make that much money. I don't like that plan, but I got to say, okay, what's information I can get? Well, I could go find out like what careers do make the most. That's just based on an idea in my head, but other careers might actually be better. So let me go look at that. Or what can I do? Well, I could talk to a career counselor. I could, start a business, see how it goes or whatever. Or I just got to try that. And if it's as bad as I think that it is, and for me, it probably would be miserable, then I'll learn a lot in that process and shift it. So that's the specific, like, practical framework I like for the balance between planning and acting. How to get yourself to stop overthinking is thinking is only worth it if I'm getting new information. If I'm not, I'm just spinning my gears.
Okay.
Try and give some practical framework. I don't even remember what the philosophical thing I was about to get into is at this point, though. What were we saying before?
I mean, like the stress cycle of it all, and being able to adjust. And yeah,
it's this. This is really abstract and I probably won't be able to communicate it in a way that makes sense to everybody else the way that I am trying to, but I'm going to try and see. By the way, that's part of what happens with communication a lot too is, I can't phrase it in a way that they'll get, which I then phrase as, I don't know how to say it. Instead of just trying it, watching their response and getting more information that way, which obviously is my thing. I'll say whatever, watch how you respond, and then do again. There is, just talking about sitcoms today, there was an old episode of Friends where Joey makes the argument that there's no such thing as a selfless act. That's a very true and valid argument. There is no such thing as a selfless act because selfless and selfish are not things. Personality traits, are not things. But what it means is I may be doing what I think you want at the expense of what I want for myself. But I'm only going to do that because A, for whatever reason, I want you to have what you want. So my own want is involved here. B, it only matters to me if in some way I can perceive or be aware of how you are, what state you are in, both before and after I do whatever I'm considering doing, and that I would rather that you be in the state that you're going to be in after, according to my prediction. I know that's a really complicated way to put it, but effectively what it means is I cannot know what's in your head and you can't know what's in mine. No matter how hard I'm trying to give you what you want, it's based in my perception of what you want. Because you value friendship. Yeah. I mean, valuing our friendship, really what I'm saying there is that my perception of your well-being is important to me. Sometimes more important to me than my own well-being to myself. I'm willing to make sacrifices for you, right? But that's still based in my perception of your experience. Now, the better we communicate, the more frequently and the more we work, the more we work on it, then the better it will get at my perception of your experience being closer and closer and closer to what your experience actually is, because I'm listening and learning, and right? But it will never be perfect. So yeah, there is any distinction between a selfless and a selfish act is arbitrary. I do have things I use those words to mean, but it's not about behavior. It's about how much of my resources do I spend thinking about you, not about whether I'm accurate, but whether I take you into consideration. I might do something that you hate, but I put a lot of thought and effort into doing it because I thought you would like it. I did it wrong, but I'm still spending a lot of resources thinking of you. Whereas if I just do whatever I want to do and don't think of you at all, that's what I would call being selfish. But yeah, it's not about doing what you want or not want. You don't do anything you don't want to do. Sometimes that means because of what you think it will result in down the line, even though the thing itself you definitely don't want to do.
Okay.
Does Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So yes, it's about communicating. If I'm trying to make everybody else happy, there's a reason I'm doing that. For whatever reason, I want everyone else to be happy. And maybe that's based in trauma and I'm scared that people aren't happy with me, or maybe it's because I love everyone here so much that if they're happy, I will be happy and I don't really care what we're doing or whatever. There's still a reason. But yeah, it can be overwhelming because I'm trying to do an impossible thing, which is to know what every person wants and get them all to want exactly the same thing and then deliver that thing. That's not going to happen.
Okay, so in this situation, like, how do you then make plans with people? Like, how do you find that balance between? I know we talked a little bit about a lot about communications and all sort of fun stuff in the past, but as far as like we're gonna make dinner plans, how do we go about doing that without, like, for me, I'm like, am I over communicating? Am I under communicating? I don't know how to find that balance. Is that just one of those things you have to like try and then test and see the results of? Like,
Well, what I would say is there's no such thing as over communicating. There is such a thing as communicating at too rapid a pace, if that makes
Okay.
sense. Like there's not too much communication, but I might be doing too much too fast for you. Like you need more time to process it, or you need time to recover your energy, or it's a bad time for you, or whatever. But over the course of a relationship, the more you communicate, the better the relationship will be, and the less you communicate, the worse it will be. You know, again, this is my theory right now, but I don't see an exception to that rule. You know, the more I'm aware of you, the more we communicate, the more I'm aware of you, and the more you're aware of me, the less we communicate, vice versa. Now, when you say over communicating, what you mean, I think, is, am I pestering this person? Am I pushing them too much? Should I leave them alone? Etc. And that's worth thinking about. But you know why it's stressing you out? It's on theme here. Why is that question stressing you out? Am I communicating with this person too much? Why is that question stressing you out?
Like, are you asking, or is it just like a
Yeah.
rhetorical?
Well, no, either way, I'm not asking you, but why would that stress a person out? There's only one reason.
Because they just don't know.
Because I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I don't know whether you want more communication from me or less. I know what I want. I don't know what you want. And because I care about you, I'm willing to sacrifice what I want to do what you want, but I don't know what it is. Communication is a specific problem here, because what is the only way for me to know more about what you want?
Psychics.
Yep, you got it. The only way for me to know better how to communicate with you is to communicate with you. So if the question is, am I trying to communicate too much? Then that is a particular, it's kind of like, how do I develop the discipline to develop discipline? You know, how do I communicate enough? Or how do I communicate about how to communicate? It's very difficult. And this is how relationships form and strengthen or weaken. The people that we feel most safe with communicating, whenever that, I almost spoke, but I caught myself. The people I feel most safe with, most comfortable that I can communicate with you whenever I want to, and it won't make you mad or sad or dislike, then you and I are gonna be closer. And people that I have to jump through a million hoops, and this is not an intentional thing. This is not like I'm punishing these people who are difficult to communicate with. It's just that's how it works. People that you have a hard time communicating with, you will communicate with less. And people you communicate with less are going to get deprioritized and therefore get communicated even less, and so on and so forth. So yeah, you got to communicate. But here's the specific practical answer, as best I can give with the general question, which is this. The human brain is terrible at weighing 3 or more options against each other. It's really bad at holding all that in the mind at the same time, which, by the way, talking about overthinking, there's a process I call juggling, which is when you're comparing complex options. Because what the brain does really well is compare 2 things. So I'll say option A and option B. Okay, well, B is cheaper and about the same in the utility, but it doesn't look as nice. Okay, now let me bring in C, which looks better than A, but not as good as C, but it's cheaper than, but it also sounds better. And now by the time I'm evaluating C, I can't remember everything about A. And so eventually I'll loop back around to A and be like, oh, right, this one, I liked it because it looked better. And I call it juggling because you're trying to fit too much in here. And when something gets bumped out, you throw it up into the air and leave a little marker behind to say, remember, there was something here. You don't remember what it is, but just remember. And when I get back to it, I got to refigure that out and bring it in, but that pushes something else out and so on. So this is the experience that everybody has making plans. Where do we all want to go to get lunch? The bigger the group, the more likely this is to happen. Where do we all want to go to get lunch? And 90% of the people will say, I don't care. I'm good with whatever, which is really just saying, I don't want to try and make this decision. So I will be fine with whatever anybody says. And then what's the next thing that happens? Somebody finally says, okay, we're going to go to Chipotle. And 5 of the people that said they would be fine with anything say, no, not Chipotle. Because where do we want to go for lunch? Anywhere in the world? I don't know. That's too hard to think about. But as soon as you present me an option that I can say yes or no on, well, that's an easy thing to evaluate. Do I want that, yes or no? So how do you make planning with other people easier? You put out the option. You say, this is what I think, this is what I want us to do. Not necessarily because I want it for myself, but it could be this is the thing I think will address most of us the best or whatever. But put out an option and let people respond to it. It's going to make it go a lot faster than everybody sitting around and being like, I don't know, what do you want? What do you want? I'm referencing pop culture today, that the old cartoon Disney Jungle Book.
Yeah.
The culture is sitting around just being like, what do you want to do? I don't know. What do you want to do? They're making fun of it because it's something we've all experienced.
Yeah.
Now, of course, the danger there is the reason that we don't do that is because we feel like, oh, if I put my option out there, that's me being selfish, or now I'm pressuring other people or obligating them to say yes to what I suggested. So instead, I'll just hang back and not say anything. But it actually makes it a lot harder for everybody if nobody is willing to be the first person to put it out there. So communicate and establish a relationship where it's, yeah, I'm going to put a suggestion out there. That doesn't mean we have to do it that way. We can talk about it. Because again, if we have a relationship where I throw a suggestion out and you're just going to do it, whether you like it or not, if I care about you at all, which some people don't, but if I care about you at all, what that's going to do is make me less and less willing to put my idea out there, because I know as soon as I do, you'll just do it. So I need to wait until you tell me, because otherwise I'll never know. So we got to communicate. I thought we were going to talk more about the intentions today, but we're talking a lot more about the plans.
Well, I figured that just there was questions about making plans with people and stuff. We can go back to the intentions though. Like,
no, I'm fine. I'm not. That's a great example, actually. I just put out a statement that literally true. I thought we would talk about this. We ended up talking about this. You interpreted that statement as, oh, I wanted to talk about this. And instead we started talking about this. And so you're attempting to give me what you think that I want, which is to get back to the other thing, which is not actually based on what I said, but your interpretation of what I said, which is the only way communication works. That's not you doing a bad thing. We all do. Does it make more sense to ask what people have a taste for, then offer options that have those flavors? That's one way to do it. It's just probably a less efficient way. Like I could do a survey, right? Thank you for the question, Heather. I could do a survey where I say, here are the 10 choices, rank them all, 1 to 10, and whatever ends up with the most points, that's where we're all going. But that doesn't mean that one person doesn't end up getting forced to go to a place that was their last pick, right? Yeah, communication. That's just a different version of communication. It's soliciting opinions beforehand. It's probably more likely to end up in a place that has a more communal approval, but it's also going to take more time and everyone has to put effort in. And a lot of times people are going to be like, I don't want to think about it. Just tell me what to do. The number of times my wife and I get into okay, one of us has to go water the plants and one of us has to clean up the kitchen. Which one do you want to do? I don't care, whatever you want to do. Or what do you want to do? And then we spend 3 minutes, nobody making a decision. When I ask you what you like to drink, go ahead, Cecil. Sorry.
No, I feel like I get stuck there too. It's just that idea of like, well, it's all the same to me. So like,
yeah. Well, so the thing about that is that it's never true. That it can't be. Two different options are different. There's no way that two different options actually have the exact equal outcome for you. Now, we might not know enough about those options to know what the difference would be, but they'll be different. Or we might not really care subjectively about what the difference is. Like, yeah, I would rather have the food at this place, but I'd rather have the shorter travel time to this place. So I don't know which one of those I value more than the other, so I don't care. Either way, there's advantages, disadvantages. But it's never the same. Tell me what you want, what you really want. Very commonly, what it means when you're saying that is, yes, I have one that I would prefer over the other, but the level to which I prefer one over the other is so minimal that I would rather just do whatever you want. You know, the thought that you were doing something less than what you wanted because I said let's do A over B, even though the difference between those two is so minimal. I don't want to do that. I'd rather you tell me. But if you're in the same place where the difference is so minimal and I'd rather you tell me, then we get stuck.
So again, it's like, go back to that idea of
idea to be.
Yeah.
Like, okay, well, I'm going to do this. If you want it different, you tell me, because I don't care, but I'm going to do this. So they're not sitting here talking about who should do what forever.
I mean, yeah, I get stuck in that a lot. And Aaron's really good about just being like, let's just do these things. I'm like, okay. Because I feel like we're sometimes on the opposite side of that, where he's like, well, let's act. And I'm like, oh, let's plan. And by plan, I mean stand around and discuss forever without ever taking action.
A lot of couples are like that. And it's, like I said, everybody, when I say buddy cop film, I don't mean literally like Lethal Weapon, but that formula, the two partners forced to work together and one's by the book and rigid and likes everything to be a certain way. It's basically like the stereotype of an autistic person and the stereotype of an ADHD person being forced to work together, and one just is impulsive and what, of course, that's not what it's like in reality. But somebody actually, I saw someone tweet recently, I can't remember who, I feel bad, I don't give credit, but I can't remember who I saw it, where they went through just like popular sitcoms and pointed out like, okay, this person exhibits symptoms of ADHD, this person exhibits autistic symptoms, right? And how like all our comedy tropes are based on those two stereotypes, you know, and how they interact. The Leslie Knope versus the Ben, I don't remember his name.
Oh, I can't remember his name right now.
Or the Jake Peralta versus the Amy Santiago, right? Anyway, yes, that's a pretty common relationship dynamic because one person gets the other to think more and the other person gets the other to act more. And so we're naturally drawn to relationships where that balances out. You and I, Cecil, are both more of people who want to think and plan. So we will have long, long conversations and the other people will be like, what are you doing? Like, just go. The lunch option, there's almost always someone who has a craving or a restriction or something. Asking for those up front opens the door for that communication. Yeah, and that's a good point, is that we can phrase the same question in a different way. If instead of saying, I don't care, then what I say instead is, well, I like this food better, but I'd rather have the shorter travel time to this other place. Then I'm still saying the same thing. I don't want to choose between the two and I'm happy with either, but in the way that I've said it, I've given you more information rather than just saying, I don't care, which gives you nothing to work with. So yeah, if you say, I don't care, but I'm vegetarian, so it has to go, it has to be someplace with good vegetarian options. Or I don't really care. I kind of feel like tacos, but I'm up for whatever, right? Just same thing, but give new information.
Cool.
Great, that's my marriage. Yeah, I mean, really, we call it, we have to wrap up. We have like 30 seconds.
Yeah.
There's a very common relationship dynamic we call pursuer-withdrawer, where when there's conflict, one person wants to communicate and discuss it right away. One person wants some space and time to like process before dealing with it. Again, that's something I used to misunderstand as one person wants to discuss it and one person doesn't. When really it's one person wants to talk about it now and one person wants to talk about it later, right? And there's validity both ways. But the joke always is if you videotaped people like this having one of those arguments that lasts till 3 a.m. and watched it and fast forward, it's like one's chasing the other around the house. One person will go to do the dishes and get some space and the other person comes to the kitchen, and then they'll go to the bathroom to get ready for bed and the other person follows them. very, very, very common dynamic, because if it's two people who always want to talk, you talk forever. If it's two people who always want to talk later, you never talk. And either way, those relationships fall apart. So yeah, in pretty much every relationship you can predict, there'll be one person that's like, no, we got to figure this out. And one person's like, get out of my face. We're not figuring this out.
Okay, cool. That is time. Look at us ending on time-ish. Thank you guys for joining us here again. We'll be here next Wednesday at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. This is we're Effective Artistry. You can find us at effectiveartistry.com or on Twitter and Instagram at EF_artistry. Reach out to us and communicate with us. We're here.
Tell me what you think about this art arrangement. I need
I guess feedback on that, and any input you like. Until then, I hope you guys have a good week, and we'll see you guys next week.
And Heather, thank you guys for your comments. Thank you all.
Yeah, thanks.